some housekeeping rules. The toilets are on the other side. If you want to go for a toilet, got some food. Please feel free to get some. Alright, we've got a jam-packed session today. Welcome to Gungahlin Community Council public meeting. My name is Henley Samuel, Vice President. On behalf of the Executive Committee, I welcome each one of you. Today we've got a jam-packed agenda. So we've got updates from Transport Canberra, so what's happening with the Gungahlin and with the buses and those kind of things. And then we've got people from Active as well to give us an update on recent outages that we had in the region. And then we're also going to get Senator Zed to give us an update on what's happening with the election promise. And finally, we do have a Gingra project update. So without further delay, I'll hand over to
David Matthews. Yeah. So my name's David Matthews. I'm the executive.
Sorry, David.
Okay.
You want to get
Great. I'll have to not wander too far then. So yeah, my name's David Matthews. I'm the executive in Transport Canberra, responsible for public transport planning and policy. And my colleague Ian McGlynn, you might be familiar with as well. He actually is another executive that runs the buses on a day-to-day basis. So we're going to do a bit of a punch and duty show and hopefully answer the questions that you've got today and to give you a bit of an update. There's a lot of things that we could cover off, so we really take a bit of direction from you about the things you might want to talk about. But we thought we might start by just giving you a couple of just let me hit that. Just a bit of statistic, a bit of data about what's happening with Gungahlin buses. There's been over 2.7 million passenger boardings in Gungahlin in the year to date. That's the financial year to date. There's just over 1.4 million passenger movements along Flemington Road year to date. So what you can see in the graph there is basically bus patronage in Gungahlin increasing year on year, and that's a really great thing for us. We're really glad that more and more residents are using the buses, and of course it positions Gungahlin around the implementation of light rail for next year. In terms of the popular bus routes, those of you that use the buses will know pretty much what they are, but the 200 is the most popular service coming out of Gungahlin, and that's almost had over 900,000 boardings already year to date. And it's followed by some of our other services, particularly the 56, which has had 209,000 boardings year to date as well. The highest growth has been experienced on the 255, and that's been a 16% increase this year. So again, just wanted to leave you with an impression about the services that are operating, where they're more popular, and really to start to see some of that growth. We appreciate that with that growth and also with the roadworks in and around Gungahlin, that some of the service reliabilities, particularly the timings, have been affected by the roadworks. So we know that it varies considerably from the peak period, of course, and non-peak period, and indeed on different days of the week, depending on how people drive out of the region and how they particularly travel south, I should say. But we know that the bus services can be affected by between 12 and 15 minutes during some of those periods, and we're trying to take that into account in some of the network timetable changes that we're going to be making in the second half of 2017. So I'll talk to those briefly in a minute. And we'll also talk to the issues around how we're going to be accessing the new bus interchange and also the traffic arrangements between now and the rest of the year. You might be aware that the Minister has made some public announcements as part of the ACT budget about an increase in our rapid services, including in the second half of this year introducing 2 new rapids. There's the Green Rapid, which operates from Woden to the city, but also the Black Rapid, which operates between Belconnen and Gungahlin. So that service will be introduced in the second half of this year, and we're looking at having a frequency of 15-minute intervals from Monday to Friday, 7 to 7. So that will allow rapid transit between the two centres of Gungahlin and Belconnen. In the second half of this year as well, with our timetable changes, we'll be increasing some time on the runs of all the services operating between Gungahlin and the city to make an allowance for the traffic-related delays that are being experienced. Of course, there's nothing we can do about that traffic, and the Minister and the government more generally have expressed their thanks for the patience being shown by the residents of Gungahlin. But what we want to make sure is that the bus services are reliable, that is, that they run according to time, and that's why we'll be making those timetable adjustments. We'll be doing what we can to as well increase the frequency of those services. We appreciate that some of the peak services in particular are at capacity, and again that's a very good sign generally that people are using the bus network, but it does create some pressures during some of those peak periods. So wherever possible, we'll be increasing the amount of service delivery that we can have on those runs, as well as looking at how we can increase the weekend frequency as well. So that's generally the update about the bus network and the introduction of new routes, and happy to come back to any questions on that. But I'll get Ian to talk about the particular works that are being done around the Gungahlin Town Centre. I'll give you this one.
That doesn't achieve much more. All right. So, thanks very much for having us in this evening. Just to give you an update and what's currently going on in the marketplace with our bus movements is that for the people that travel through the vicinity quite often, you'll understand that we're back to the original spot where the buses were when Gungahlin was just the Woolworths on the block at the top of the hill. So we're operating off Gosard Street. We intend to stay there whilst they're doing the works in Gungahlin Place, coming to the south. So this vicinity here. So you'll actually see that road is now blocked off, and there's some road widening going on. So that road widening is between. So there's some works there. That's a relocation of a major water main. Then the widening of the road commences, which goes up to F. Capita Street, and then the last component of the works is between F. Capita Street and the Valley Way, and that is road widening, and then to a stage where it's 2 lanes at the very top with a right-hand turn and a left-hand turn. So once this work is complete, the buses going towards the city, once this is done, and that's due around August this year to be complete, we will then take the buses off the side of Gosard Street and bring them back around onto Hibberson Street temporarily. And that way we've got the big bus bays there, which will free this area up a little bit. So people will be able to board the bus there, they'll come down, turn right up Gungahlin Place and then back out onto the Valley Way. And they'll continue that running down to Manning Clark and then right onto Flemington Road, and they'll continue that. Once this part of the work is complete, then they'll start the construction on the northern side, which is where the 2 bus stations will be. So the 2 bus stations are at the northbound one is at the top here, and then the incoming and services going to the south, they'll all commence from Gungahlin and Hibberson Street on the corner, just there. It'll be a head of queue arrangement, so the buses will come in there. That work, as long in line with the weather, if the weather doesn't impact the ability to do the construction, we envisage that we will be in there fully operational in the beginning of 2018. So we'll miss the Christmas period, just take it out of that major shopping time in that vicinity, and then sometime late January before the school term commences for 2018, we'll then be operating from our permanent location. So when the light rail does commence service, the bus stops are adjacent to it.
I guess just a couple of other things that were announced in the budget was some bus infrastructure work. So we're certainly continuing to put in place new bus infrastructure on Gundaroo Drive, on Nullarbor Avenue, also Well Station Drives. We're looking at further bus infrastructure around Crace. So also wanted to emphasise with you that a good passenger experience from people that are using the bus network, we appreciate, includes the whole experience of the bus stop, the waiting time, and the actual experience during the bus journey itself. So we'll continue to identify opportunities to improve our bus infrastructure, as well as this work around the interchanges, and of course we're working very closely with our colleagues in light rail to make sure that we've got the best connectivity between buses and light rails from day one when it commences next year. Now, I guess we'd be happy to take any general questions or issues that people wanted to raise today.
So David, so when are we going to get buses for the new suburbs? Like Jack have been there for a few years now. They don't have any buses. So Montgrave, they don't have any buses. So can you please clarify when are you guys planning to get those buses coming soon for those new suburbs that Jack wouldn't go new because it's been there for a few years now?
Yeah. So the honest and direct answer is that those decisions are still being finalised, but what I can give you some indication about is that, as I've mentioned, in the second half of this year, we'll be doing some fairly modest changes to our network to introduce the two rapids that the government has promised, and to bring into more time into the network associated with roadworks. There'll be limited opportunity to introduce new services in the back half of this year, and we are looking at making more substantial network changes and introducing new services in early part of 2018. So that's our current timetable, but we're still working through that process and still paying very close attention to population changes and growth, school enrolment data, and other road usage data to try to best understand what demand is in different parts of Gungahlin.
Because if you're waiting for the school data, you might not get the Montgrave and Jack because they don't have schools.
No, I appreciate that.
So,
But we do know broadly the school enrolment data about where people are going to school. So of course that is out of area at the moment. So we've got some understanding of the passenger movements, the family movements as people commute to work and drop their kids off at school. So we definitely take into account all of that data. When we make any changes to the network, we can't make any change just in isolation. It does affect the whole operation of the network. So we need to do that in the best possible way to make sure that the connections are on time and that the headways are appropriately timed. So we, as I said, at this stage are looking at making more substantial changes to the network in the early part of 2018, but we'll continue to review and look at needs between now and then.
Now, a bit concerned about Ernest Cabinet. It doesn't seem like a road that can carry a double two lots of buses at once.
Yep. Do you want to talk to that?
So Ernest Kavanagh, thanks very much for the question, but Ernest Kavanagh actually is where the loading zone is at the moment, for the back of Woolies. So it is substantially wide enough from our preliminary investigations. There will be a little bit of roadworks there because obviously they're putting in some traffic lights down the corner here of Ernest Kavanagh and Gosard Street. So that'll be allowed to not only allow us out, but also the Woolies trucks that come in and do deliveries, so to allow them to get out across the intersection. So the road width, we have done the investigations. We've done the tuning templates up here, where the Medicare is and Centrelink on the top there. So that seems to be adequate as well, and there's enough turning template to make the right-hander off Ernest Kavanagh into Gungahlin Place.
And secondly, where is the park and ride?
So at the present time, there's the park and ride just over the back of Peter Street, which we've talked about at the last meeting, and Gary Rake was going to go away and have a look at putting a permit system on that. The other park and ride, I've just got to get my bearings. I think there's a park and ride just in here.
Yeah.
So
Fair way from the White Road.
So Gungahlin Place, so the park and ride is in this vicinity, the rail stop is there.
Now, the work to walk there
There's something else.
Both of those are not permanent.
No.
So they're going to be further away. They're not going to come closer, are they?
Well, there's no geographic location we can actually get closer from the southern side.
So those are temporary, they're going to move further.
Well, they're not sealed, so that's why I'm saying at the moment they're temporary. If they're going to make them permanent, you would think that they'd look to seal them up. Yeah. That is not our area of influence that we can directly speak to. Happy to take the question on notice and come back through the council's Facebook page that they can post something on there, so we can go away. They did do that modification up here last year. Yeah, it is that's another temporary facility at the current time. With Ernest Kavanagh, I believe, is still due to be punched through up here to Cape Grace with some development along those blocks.
There's currently a big cut between the street and the street. Across the road.
Yep, the cinema site, I believe it is.
Go there, so where are all those cars going to go?
Yep, that's a very good question. We're public transport. We'll take that question for you, and we'll find somebody to come back and tell us what's going on in that situation.
I've got a question from Facebook. I suspect it's also not your department, that's fine. Do you guys have any stakeholder engagements with the shops that are affected by either light rail or the bus station going in?
So,
Is that in your purview?
no, it's not. So we actually don't own the facilities. We just operate along them. So there would have been some consultation around the development for the bus station, and all the shop owners were spoken to, and the people in the residence were also given an opportunity to provide feedback, and they were answered. And I think at the CMA one that we had down at the ANZ Footy Club, we spoke about that with a little bit of detail.
But nonetheless, if there are any shopkeepers or business owners that want to talk further to the construction team, they are in our directorate. So if you can get those details for us, then we'll pass them on to that team.
Jeff, I've spoken to all of them individually. I actually handed them the bus station proposal that you had down at the library, and none of them were aware of what work you were doing, and none of them said anybody from the government had approached them and showed them what was planned for that area. Completely unaware of the fact that the paving would have to be ripped up and the parking would be lost in that area. So
Yeah. Okay.
I can tell you
Yep.
categorically from my own personal opinion, when I went in and visited and showed them things, nobody had talked to them directly. And if you did have something on, they either didn't know about it or didn't attend. And a lot of the people that own the shops along there, many of them don't even speak English as their first language. So a lot of them even I had difficulty communicating with because often they were different restaurants of different
Yep.
breed, Japanese and so forth. And the owners there didn't speak English very well. They really had no idea. So community engagement, a very good score.
Okay. So unfortunately, when we're in part of that community engagement that's held by a different area, we'll certainly get some feedback and we'll pass that on and come back through the Gungahlin Facebook page.
Thank you. We've got a question. I'm glad you mentioned the last time. I'm interested in what services are going to be removed when the trend is implemented, and what mitigations are going to do for those of us who will be disadvantaged by having to walk to the tram where a bus is much closer, where the tram won't do what the 200 goes and take us to the other side of the lane. What services are going to be removed, and two, how are we going to mitigate the worst outcomes of having a tram which won't do what the 200 does?
Yep. All right. Thanks for that question. So my role and David's role in the planning is to ensure that with the amount of money that's invested in light rail, if we didn't provide a more frequent service to feed the rail, you wouldn't get the patronage. That'll be the goal. We will be planning the services to come on a frequent basis to make the connection at light rail. So there's no hiding behind it. You will make a connection. You'll get off the bus and you'll make the connection with the light rail. You go to the city. Now, if you're travelling to Russell, sir, or over to Barton, then it is David and my responsibility to ensure that we are designing a service that meets the network timing points of the rail getting off so that people can actually make a connection, or that we minimise any waiting period. I can't guarantee that every time the rail comes in, because it comes in every 6 minutes.
When do you think you'll have an answer or a draft timetable that we can start to examine see what the implications are for each individual.
Okay, so that's where David mentioned before that we will be putting down a network in the first 6 months of next year, and then obviously we then free up some more resources when the light rail comes in, because there's it's been talked, there's between 1 and 1.2 million kilometres, depending on which article you read, about the kilometres saved of us driving up and down Flemington Road and Northbourne Avenue. So that needs to be reinvested. One of the other things that we need to take into consideration is that the government announced before going to the election last year that they were procuring another 80 buses for us over the next few years. We're in the stage at the moment of doing that procurement. We will have the first buses coming, because when you buy a bus, it's not like buying a Falcon. Well, so you can't buy Falcons anymore. What have we got? So buying a Mercedes at the dealer where they've got them available, or they just transport one in from somewhere else. So when we buy buses, we have to buy chassis from overseas. They're imported into Australia. Then it goes to a bus body builder who then builds it for us. So we have to get a build slot. But firstly, our previous contract of buying buses has expired, and due to the procurement regulations, we now need to do a procurement process. We're in the process of doing that now. Once that's finalised, then we'll be able to book build slots and have the chassis brought over. Depending on what availability they have in the delivering of those vehicles to us, will also influence the amount of service that we'll be able to, increase in service that we'll be able to provide.
So your answer is implying the services increases are likely to be towards Gungahlin. My understanding of previous answers is that the released services will be distributed more broadly across Canberra, which doesn't make sense to me, but you are saying some of those services will be reinvested in Gungahlin.
So for the answer to your question is actually what we refer to as frequency. The more frequent I can make the service, and if I'm just taking buses, say let's take the 255, which is one of the ones that was quite popular. If we send that out the back, out through Ford, around near Jacka and then back, I can do that more often because the bus, once it gets to Gungahlin, it's terminating. It's ready for its next journey. It's not going all the way down Flemington Road to the city, to the railway station or to Fishwick.
Sorry. Sorry, guys.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, is that okay if we're going to get back to you with questions and stuff, because our next speaker, we're going to be leaving soon. So would you mind answering the question in another 20 minutes or so? So, yeah. Thanks, Ian and David. Without further delay, I would like to invite Senator Zed to give us an update on the election promises for the federal agency.
So I need to put this on or just hold it? We'll clip it on. I'll try not to pull it out. Sorry, this way. Just bear with me for a sec. Sorry. Okay there? All right. Well, look, thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me. And I'm sorry to cut in on the previous presentation, but the Community Council was very keen for me to come and give a bit of an update on the Gungahlin office. Now, I should acknowledge my good friend James Milligan, the member for Gungahlin. It's good to see you here, mate, as always. A couple of things. We're doing a little office move, which is happening very soon. That's my electorate office, but that's not the relevant thing that I want to talk about tonight. But that's going to be coming very, very soon here in Gungahlin. Probably in the next month or so, we'll be moving there. And it'll be the first time we've had any elected representatives have an office in Gungahlin. But also for the first time at the last election, as some of you would be aware, we promised that we would relocate a small to medium Commonwealth agency to Gungahlin. That was the promise we took to the election. That was something I pushed hard for, because I remember my time in the Assembly, there was always a lot of discussion about this. I know how important it is to town centres to have a employment base, and obviously Gungahlin, because it's it's our youngest town centre, it hasn't had some of the benefits that we've seen in other town centres. When we were looking to make this promise, when we were looking to develop this policy, one of the things I didn't want to do is to sort of necessarily have, one ripped out of Belconnen or ripped out of Woden, because then you get some of the same issues there. But what I thought was actually a good way to go was looking at the triangle, because if you look at the parliamentary triangle, like some of you may work in the parliamentary triangle these days, there's no doubt that it's a nice place to work, but at the same time, There's no real business base other than a sort of few hotels. It's not the town centre in the way that Woden is and Belconnen is and Tuggeranong is and Gungahlin is, where you've got businesses that very much hang off that public sector employment. So I wanted to bring you up to date with the process. It is somewhat frustratingly slow for me, but I can give you, let you know where it's up to, and it is progressing. So, those of you who are Commonwealth public servants would acknowledge that you sort of have to go through a bit of a process. So the process was to identify the agency. Now that has been done. I can't announce the agency because the Commonwealth, the Department of Finance is going through a process with that agency where they initially speak to the senior management and then obviously they go through a broader consultation process with that agency. But that agency's been identified. I'm expecting, and the latest advice I have is that there will be, after some internal process within that agency, that we would expect a procurement process to start in the back end of this year. So what that would involve would be most likely that that agency goes out to a competitive tender process in Gungahlin. It has the specifications that it needs for the X 100 staff members that would be moving to the Gungahlin town centre. And then obviously local businesses, there's the business park obviously which has been set aside. There are some vacant lots of land. There would be a competitive process there where people would put in bids, and then obviously the Commonwealth will look to get the best value for money that it possibly can. It will obviously be a brand new office, so it'll be good for those staff who are coming, but it will also mean that those several hundred staff will be based here in the town centre. And what generally happens, I can't say exactly what will happen with the lease because that's a negotiation, that's part of that procurement process, but what generally happens is the Commonwealth, in order to get best value, tends to sign reasonably long leases. So I'll give you an example I'm familiar with. The Department of Social Services just committed, it's in Tuggeranong, and it committed to a new building in Tuggeranong. That building is going up. That's I believe, a 15-year lease with a 15-year option. So you can see some sort of long-term presence there. It won't necessarily be exactly that, but it's very rare that the Commonwealth would enter into an arrangement for a new building with only a short lease. It just wouldn't make any economic sense, and it makes much more sense for that to happen. So that's where that process is up to. That's something I'm very keen to push, and so what I have to do is I have to work with the Department of Finance, who works with the individual agency, and we need to work through that. But you'd also be familiar, and particularly those of you who are in the Commonwealth Public Service or in the ACT Public Service, that there does need to be a process. If you're going to move people in a workplace, you're going to consult with that workplace and go through a fair process in that. But that decision's been made. We're very much committed to it. It's just a matter of now getting it through the process. So that's the latest I have, Henley, for you on that. But I'm happy to answer questions on that, or indeed on any other issues that anyone in the room would like to raise.
Do we have any expected time, or the numbers of, how many people were expected to work?
Well, small to medium, sort of, when we spoke about it during the election, we envisaged somewhere between about 300 and 600. So it'll be within that range. I know which end of that range it is, but if I tell you that number, it'll potentially give away the agency because there's only so many agencies that fit within that. And I just have to be fair to the employees in particular, that it's not going to be publicly announced until they've had an internal process, but it would be within that range of about 300 to 600 staff, or FTE.
For committing the promise and announcing the Commonwealth agency in the Gungahlin. I'm Prasad Tikuneni, I'm a Gungahlin Council member for the last 5 years. I work with James, and we are working for the development of Gungahlin for a long time. And this is the good news for Gungahlin. Thanks, Jed, for taking the opportunity and providing a common government in Gungahlin Town Centre. That will give an opportunity to grow more businesses to come and all of the development of Gungahlin.
That's my pleasure. Thank you. And obviously, I mean, going back to my time in the Assembly, I do remember when there was this push to centralise a lot of ACT government agencies, and one of the arguments we made against that particular project a number of years ago was that it would drag people from the outer suburbs like Gungahlin and Tuggeranong and other places and take jobs out of those town centres where they are very, very important, whereas in the city it's arguable, yes it's important in the city, but it's arguable that there's a greater critical mass and a greater demand already and a lot of staff. Lady there had a question.
So this
Yeah, that's right. So that was, I mean, that's, and I skipped over that and I do apologise. When they were going through the process, obviously, so after the election, that was the thing that they had to do, was to look at all the leases. So you're not going to get someone who's got 10 years to go on their tenancy because it's not good value for money. So that's absolutely right. So we looked at the size of the agencies, we looked at the location of the agencies, and then obviously those who were coming close to the end of their tenancy, and that they were the ones who were then shortlisted and were seen as most suitable for a potential move. Yes?
Just a quick question in regards to infrastructure spending, federal.
Yep.
There doesn't appear to be a lot in the last few budgets in regards to federal expenditure in Canberra. Many of the other states in Australia have large infrastructure projects on the board.
Yep.
Canberra doesn't seem to have any apart from what has already been built, which is the Majora Park Road that was built. Do you think that there might be something in the future, in the next, say, 12 months or a couple of years, maybe even, say, Barton Highway overpass or something like that from the federal government?
Yeah, look, the Barton, I mean, I'll probably start with the specific and then go to the general, but look, the Barton Highway overpass is obviously a topical one. I think, James, you might correct me if I'm wrong, but the opposition had a sort of policy on that at the last election, I think, so obviously that didn't come to fruition, but that's obviously been a topical local issue, so that's certainly one that I'd see as a priority. The Barton Highway generally, the Monero Highway in the south, are important roads at either end. We've got some money for forward planning when it comes to the Monero, and there is some money for the Barton over the border as well, which was in the budget. That's progressing. But you're right, I mean, there's been, in terms of recent large road projects, so we had like double the black spots in the last couple of years, which was good, but that's a smaller bucket of money than the big infrastructure. Certainly that's something I'm pushing for, and those are some of the priorities. I've got to say, we sometimes don't get, we probably don't sometimes recognise some of the infrastructure spend that's there that's sort of not on roads or some of those more obvious projects that is a massive spend in the ACT. So there's this discussion around, for instance, the new immigration headquarters. Whilst they're going to be staying in Belconnen, they're going to have a new headquarters. That's an over $200 million spend on that fit out there. Where in the budget we had and there'll be a number of announcements that come from this. And I made this point on budget night. But the $500 million Public Service Modernisation Fund, now as part of that there is ACT infrastructure. Some of that's been announced in terms of some of our institutions getting good upgrades. So I know we all want to see roads, and I push for that. I understand the importance of that, and we do have roads funding. But these pieces of infrastructure are really important, and if we went to somewhere in regional New South Wales and said we're going to spend $30 million upgrading this centre, people would say that's a really big infrastructure investment. When we do it in Canberra, we sort of say, well, that's just sort of what we do. But it is important, and we're investing in that. The modernisation fund will be very important for Canberra because there's that $500 million will be not just some of those infrastructure projects, but ICT and other infrastructure as well. So that builds the capacity of the public service, but a lot of it will be spent here in Canberra. And I'd make a point which is not infrastructure but didn't get noticed a lot in the budget, is the massive increase in health spending here in the ACT in the federal budget. It's now up about 60% from where it was when we came to government. So year on year it's going up, well above health inflation, well above population growth. So there's some really good things, but you're right, I mean, we're pushing for those as well.
They announced $70-something billion worth of infrastructure not that long ago. Canberra didn't really feature much in there.
Yeah, no, but as I say, I think we sometimes don't get the credit for all of these various spends. Like, for instance, the little one, I mean, this will be a piece of Gungahlin infrastructure. Now, the Commonwealth probably won't be paying for that new building, but that will be tens of millions of dollars that's spent here as a result of a Commonwealth decision, and the benefit is here, and then the jobs are here. So that's real, and that's real for our economy as well.
The federal government kind of has a tie-in with that, though, in the sense that if the transport infrastructure isn't up to scratch, then they don't get the productivity because they're people who work within the federal departments are stuck in traffic. So often I think that a comparison with other cities, for example, is quite unique in the sense that many of the people who are trying to get to work are trying to get to a federal government.
Indeed.
Which again is working in with them. So the money that they spend is beneficial to the federal government because they're gaining more money in productivity. I don't think that comes into the debate
Yeah, look, that's exactly right. And there'll be a discussion and a legitimate debate and discussion in the context of the infrastructure you mentioned with the Barton Highway flyover. The CSIRO site is going to be released for development. And so there's obviously going to be a discussion and negotiation between the ACT government and the federal government about what infrastructure should go with that. And of course, that's one piece of infrastructure that potentially...
The other piece is the light rail stage 2, but I know that that's exactly the same as the flyover, but that's going to be running right through National Capital Authority land.
It is.
Or something, so there's a
potentially
benefit that apparently goes back to the federal government in that regard, so that in itself will be something else.
Thank you. Is there anyone else got any questions? On a historical point of view, if a government department moves from X to Y, what percentage of people move?
Well, that's interesting. I don't have those figures, the exact figures in my head, but I did look at this some time ago. What happens is, so when you say move to the area to live near?
No, or just work in the area. Right?
Yeah.
Like say, so if the government department that is trying to move up here is in the triangle.
Yep.
Right. Well, at the moment they're potentially getting people coming from all parts.
That tends to be the case with the triangle. Yep. Yep.
Right. If or when we get one in Gungahlin, people in Gungahlin are going to want to drive to Gungahlin.
Well, what tends to happen is in the short term, everyone just, if you live in Tuggeranong, you go to Gungahlin instead of the triangle. If you live in Woden, you do the same. If you live in Gungahlin, you no longer have to go to the triangle. What happens over time, historically, is people tend to make choices to work closer, if they can, to where they live. So what you would expect to see is the proportion of Gungahlin-based staff of that agency. So if that starts at 15% when they're in the triangle, over time you would expect to see that increase quite significantly.
And what time frame are you talking about, like for the bulk of the increase?
Look, I don't have those exact figures, but what happens is people just make those decisions, and so as those decisions are made, they either make the decision when they're already working in that agency to buy a house or to rent a house in the area, or they make the decision, if they're living there, to look for agencies that are closer to home. And obviously that's a lifestyle issue. If you can do it, it's a great thing. It's one of the benefits of our town centre model. It's the way it was planned, and the only way it works is with some decent anchor tenants in those. And so obviously this is a small step towards that, it's a small but important step. Obviously the ACT government's going to have to continue to make decisions in that regard, and we should be pushing over time for other Commonwealth agencies to be moving here as well.
If you don't have further questions, thank you, Senator, for coming down.
My pleasure, Henley. Thank you very much for having me, mate.
Thank you. So I'm going to welcome back Ian and David. While they come back, I'm going to got a couple of apologies from as well. So Minister Megan, and I've got apologies from Alistair Kerr as well. So we got 2 more presentations to go. So what I'm going to do, the intention is maybe we'll open for another 5-10 minutes for question, and then we'll wrap up the session. Thank you.
And look, maybe just to close the loop on the last question as well, certainly the intention from the government is to come out and consult with the community about the changes to the bus network, which will be taking place in 2018. Obviously, with light rail commencing, the bus network will change as we've already discussed. So we'll be wanting to have those conversations very broadly with the community, and that will happen well in advance of light rail commencing. And as Ian said, whilst the details are still to be confirmed, our idea is to put in place the network that will be operating post light rail, before light rail, so that we can start to make those changes and embed them in, and from the commencement of light rail have a very smooth transition for commuters.
Can I just ask one thing real quick? You mentioned the fact that you're going to change it to Gozard Street and the Valley Avenue. That'll be the new... You know how you're going to have them up, they're going to get on the bus and they're going to go in and make a left turn that's along the Valley Avenue.
Yep.
So that intersection currently, just be a bit wary of that. The traffic that actually flows along there is really consistent and really quite difficult to get across, the best of times. So I would envision that sending the buses down that route, considering there's no lighting, no intersection, perhaps just to kind of give way out for light.
So, okay, we don't have it, but the intersection there of Gungahlin Place and the Valley Way will have a set of traffic lights.
Oh, the temporary one that you're going to do, see along there, the temporary routes that you're choosing, just that section right there.
Yeah.
That isn't signalised at all. So
No.
once you send the buses along there, just be aware of that. That is a really busy road.
No. So the signalisation will be here, which is Gungahlin Place coming through. So that the LDA is undertaking those works.
So eventually you will run down Gungahlin Place, that's fine. I'm
Yeah.
just suggesting that in the interim, until that's built, you're going to be sending buses down that route.
Yes.
That intersection there is going to
All right. So that's what we're currently doing now. And in the peak hours, the people that actually work in the area or come along in the buses, we've actually got traffic controllers in the area, just in the peaks, just to ensure that the buses get a good flow through, so we don't have a build up of buses. So, yeah.
Yeah, I've got another question online. Is there any update on the electric bus trial contract?
You guys, apparently someone had met the supplier of the electric buses. Megan was talking to them and suggested that that has been put back out to tender.
Look, it certainly has been put out to tender, so it's going through the final stage of the procurement process. So what I would be suggesting is that very shortly there will be an announcement from the second procurement process. The first procurement process, there was a media release from the Minister which went out where the contractual obligations couldn't be met. The Territory did not spend any money because the contract was on the basis that upon delivery and acceptance that we would then start contributing, leasing those buses for a 12-month period. But very shortly, that procurement process, the second procurement process, will be wrapped up and there'll be an announcement.
Stay tuned.
So,
Any timescale on?
sorry?
Any estimated timescale on an announcement?
The procurement process can vary about who has to sign them off. So within a month or so, I would think that we'll be at that stage. Sorry, sir.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for taking my question, guys. Is there any thought to relocating the driver's layout into block?
So so at the moment you would have seen that I've moved the Cape Grace one. Yeah. So the Cape Grace one has gone down to a temporary location around about where this bus is here, and we're just waiting for the water to be connected to that, and then we'll do the final works, and then we'll be able to turn that back into a milling facility. Look, we certainly understand at the top of Anthony Roth with the signalisation of the intersection, so we're going to lose the roundabout. With the construction of the towers and all that high density living in that area where we currently are, is that the best placing in Gungahlin? It's the best place I've got at the present time. Am I looking for potential alternatives? Yes, I am.
I just want a bit of clarity. You said before there'll be more services into all the suburbs once the light rail comes in. Will they be split throughout the day? Because at the moment it's really good if you start work at 8 and finish work at 5, but if you work flexible hours, you can be standing in Gungahlin for over half an hour waiting for a bus.
Look, that's a really good question, because we acknowledge that our current demand for bus services is very peak oriented, and that's the case with all public transport systems, but even more so with Canberra. So what that means is that for us, the morning peak really tests our capability to put a service on the road. That is, we fully utilise everything we've got in terms of drivers, buses and bus infrastructure, and provide the good level of service that we do. But what we also acknowledge is that increasingly people want to travel outside of those peaks and into the evening if they're working, and also on weekends. So the objective behind the government's rapid bus network is to provide a much higher level of frequency throughout the day, so that people can rely on those rapid and frequent services outside of the peak hours as well as during the peak hours, and to increase the level of weekend service delivery. The light rail itself will be running much later later into the evening than the current bus service, and that's a reflection of what the community are looking for in terms of public transport provision. So we're aware of what makes a good city as far as public transport's concerned, and the variety of needs that we're trying to service in the city at the one time. It is a challenge with our geography, it's a challenge with our big peak, but we're a university town as well. We've got a very strongly growing university sector, and university students want to travel throughout the day and on the weekends and into the evenings as well. So that's very much the approach that we're wanting to take with our network planning going forward, and of course then it's a question of meeting those different range of competing priorities and putting a reliable bus service on the road. But I can certainly assure you that our objectives with both our bus and our light rail going forward is to provide a more regular service throughout the day, as well as meeting our peak demand.
I'm just going to make a suggestion. In your next network briefing, Katie Markson's been open for a year now, and there are bus stops located in front of it. Yep. Can you send a bus past it?
That'd be really good, but the other streets that we currently go through, Casey, they may have to miss out. So there is some thought about how we can incorporate the Casey Market Town as with the retirement village, which is just down the road. Not a real retirement village, but the transition to retirement area. There's just down there on the old Gold Creek site, opposite the school, John Paul College School. Yeah, so there's.
Like you've been sussing it out, Ian.
Yes, yeah. Well, I did live in the area, and I was actually here on the weekend doing some shopping and scoping everything out. So in a little bit of preparation. So, but not only do we get good information from public sessions like this, our drivers live and work in this community as well, and when they're driving around, they put in some really good feedback to us as well about why do we go down here, why don't we go down there, and we can probably catch some more people, etc. So.
Sorry, there's one more question that's coming from online. Hopefully it's a quick one. When will we be told, so what type of timescale are we talking about before we get information about bus routes integrating with light rail?
When will you be told? So, well ahead of time. So, as I've suggested, the objective is to make a more substantial network change in the first half, closer to the middle of next year. And our intention is to begin community consultation before the end of this year and to do that through the early part of next year. So, obviously, there's various different levels of detail that people are looking for. Some people literally want to know about their bus stop and their street and how they get to work. Others are more interested in the transport more generally. So we'll be having all of those different types of conversations, from the back half of this year through the early part of next year.
Thank you. Just a last question before you go. So there was an election promise they want to try a trial bus from Gungahlin to Gungahlin.
Yep.
So what's the progress or any update in regards to that?
So yes, we're well aware of the election commitments. At the moment, and we have referred to earlier tonight, we've exhausted our available fleet at the moment. So I have no spare fleet to undertake a trial. The network that we're planning to put down later in the year, which incorporates all those time adjustments so that we give more accurate travel times, just with all the roadworks, etc. We're looking that would be our earliest opportunity to bring in a trial. And there's some requirements that we need to take into consideration with that, and we'll probably come to the Community Council because we've spoken about this over many occasions when I've been out here about what the requirement is, for how many people are going to want to travel from Gungahlin to Tuggeranong. But, so that's a long span. I think it'll take me an hour and something minutes, sorry, I didn't write that down, but to get a bus all the way down to Tuggeranong. So what we need to do is to make sure, and I've explained this before, that if a bus doesn't leave here full, is it a really good use of resource? So I need to understand from the community that's travelling from Gungahlin to Tuggeranong, what's the preferred time? I can't give everybody I can't pick somebody up at 7:10. Somebody likes to leave it, at 7:30 after the news. I can't break it down the service like that. But what I need to do is understand what's good for all. Not. So. Yeah, so certainly we're on a recruitment campaign at the moment. So we had a very, we got around 360 applications to become Transport Canberra Action drivers this year. We're going through that at the moment, and we're currently recruiting what we believe is, we're probably at the moment bringing on another 40 to 50 drivers, what we think the network will be later in the year. So we're already engaging those drivers now through a training cycle. So yeah, that's don't miss next year's recruitment.
So just the last word on that, we'd really like your input in designing what that trial looks like. So as Ian said, you know, the practical issues of when does it leave, how many services are going to be provided, getting an understanding of any other travel requirements that people have got. So we would invite any feedback through your website or through the Community Council, and are happy to engage with any individual around that, just so that we can put the service on the road that is going to best meet community needs, and very much interested in understanding from people who's going to use it and what type of service they're looking for.
All right, thank you, Ian and David. Much appreciated.
All right. So without further delay, we're going to invite Syro Ginninderra project team to give us an update on what's happening with the planning and the progress. Thanks, Joe.
Hi, thanks for your time tonight. My name's Joe Colbert. I'm the Director of Business and Infrastructure Services for Syro, so I'm responsible for the development of the Ginninderra project, and with me tonight is Guy Barnett, who's an urban ecologist, and he's our newly appointed Science Director for the project as well. So Guy's going to talk to you a little bit about where we're going with the science. For those of you that don't know, CSIRO owns 701 hectares of land that runs from William Slim Drive all the way through to the New South Wales border, and from Barton Highway all the way through to Owen Dixon Drive. We've been on that site since 1948. It's been the site of our research farm, and we've actually had quite a number of major science breakthroughs as a result of research undertaken on that farm. It's an underutilised farm. We're only using about 200 hectares of that, so we are relocating that farm to Burrawa, and we are going to divest of the land there through doing a joint venture partnership with a developer to develop the land in a science-led urban development. So our plan for the site is to actually have it as a benchmark site for sustainable urban development in the longer term. So as part of that, we're actually doing a lot of work around the science plan. We're actually in the final processes at the moment of selecting our development partner to go forward with. We expect to have that partner selected by the end of this year, with a contract signed in the first quarter of next year. Our view at this point in time, our timing is with a view to commence construction on the site in 2019, with the first lot of land sales due around 2021, 2022. In the first instance, we're only developing the eastern portion of the site, so that is the site that runs from Barton Highway through to Coringa Drive and Owen Dixon Drive, and we are preserving another two. On the northern side, we're reserving quite a large area as conservation space, and we're actually doing quite a bit of regeneration work. So based on that, I might hand over to Guy, and Guy can talk you through our science plans on the site, where we're going to, and what we've actually already commenced doing.
Okay, thanks, Joe. So in terms of the science that we've been undertaking on the site, I think last time we spoke to you, we'd had ecological consultants go over the property, the Ginninderra property, looking for, rare and threatened species and ecological communities. So we do have a number of those on our site, and there's the complete report is available on our website at Ginninderra Project. But I guess since then we've also had a number of ecologists from CSIRO go over that material and go through the site in quite a bit of detail. So in addition to what we're required to protect, there's additional buffer zones and areas that we believe we need to protect in addition to that. So it's over 30% of the 701 hectares, so about 200 hectares that are being committed to conservation purposes at this stage. And since then, there's, two main projects that we've been undertaking on the site. So one of those is a collaboration with the Ginninderra Catchment Group, where we're exploring with the use of fire, particularly cool autumn burns, to restore the native grasslands on the site. And so we're looking at comparing fire as a management tool to mowing regimes and other conventional practices to manage native grasslands. We've also been looking at restoring our box gum grassy woodlands on the site. So that's a threatened ecological community on the property. There are beautiful big old trees there on the site, but the understory is quite disturbed. And so particularly over the last 6 weeks or so, we've been undertaking some restoration projects in our box gum grassy woodlands. We've had 2 community planting days where we've had, I think, around 120 community members come onto our site, and we've planted over 3,000 shrubs into our grassy box gum woodlands there. The purpose there is to replace that, I guess, shrubby layer that's largely gone in those grassy box gum woodlands, and so we're trying to create habitat that attracts the woodland birds, particularly threatened woodland birds, back into that community. Had a great turnout from the community. We had the Well Station Cub Pack out in force, planting on both those days, and that's been a really great experience. And I guess finally, just touching on the science plan, CSIRO is quite a big organisation, around 5,000 people across the nation. What we're doing at the moment is going through, I guess, an internal process of gauging the skills and capability that we have across CSIRO that is relevant to creating a livable, sustainable, resilient urban community. So that's tapping into people in our manufacturing area that work on building materials and products, through to people in the area that I work in, which is more sort of the ecological and social sciences, where we're concerned with livability and conservation issues, through to people working on energy and water and so forth. So we're basically doing a stock take of all the ideas and the research capability that we can bring to bear to the project, and we're pulling that together into a science plan at the moment. So that's an ongoing process. I'd have to say the scientists are really excited about the opportunity to do applied research here on our Ginninderra site, and to do that research in, I guess, a real-world context, to learn from that, use Ginninderra, the Ginninderra site, I guess, as a showcase, as a living lab that we can learn from, and then hopefully mainstream some of those ideas into other urban developments, in Canberra and around the nation. So that's a quick snapshot of where we're up to. Joe, I don't know whether you wanted to add any final comments?
I suppose probably the only other point to add is across all the science streams that CSIRO currently has, across all of our service streams, to date we've had proposals from everyone but one science stream, and that's astronomy and space sciences, and that's only because it's really hard to put a radio telescope in the middle of a suburb. But every other science area is really interested in health and biosecurity, Data 61. They're all extremely interested and excited about actually being involved in designing, I suppose, what we envisage will be the cities of the future.
Do you have any plans to being able to pass on your expertise to our local people in the ACT? Things like we're going to have interns from the ACT government, from different departments working with you guys, and vice versa, so that we get some extra benefit from this great project?
Look, we've certainly made that offer to the ACT government, that we're happy to actually use our science to actually inform their policy and their frameworks, and be involved in collaborative planning wherever possible.
Are you getting any response?
Yeah, we are engaging at an officer level with Gary Rake and Kathy Lee at this point in time.
Just curious, this is probably part of the controversy that exists at the moment in regards to this federal government land.
Yes.
And when you sell it, it continues to be federal government land?
No, when we sell it, our intention is, our clearly stated intention is that it will be territory land.
Okay, so it'll be subject to rates that are paid?
Yes, absolutely. Stamp duty that will be paid to the ACT state government rates, and the ACT government rates that will be payable to the ACT government, yes.
But in the same retrospect, you're going to say that there's kind of, you're going to have a plan for what's going there that will feed into some federal government fund?
So the planning process, the planning approvals at this point in time will be done by the National Capital Authority, because it is gazetted national land. So the National Capital Authority is the planning authority at this point in time. we fully intend to continue engaging with the ACT government and bringing them on the journey on the basis that at the end of all this project we don't want stranded assets. We want this to actually fold neatly back into the wider ACT community and actually be a benchmark. We see this as the ability to actually bring a lot of convention tourism back into Canberra on the basis that if we achieve our goal, this will be an international benchmark site and it'll bring a number of conferences to it. So every year there are quite literally thousands of conferences on sustainable housing and green housing. Canberra doesn't currently get a great deal of them. We see absolutely. Yeah, and we're working on that, making that the smoothest transition we possibly could. So, to the average ACT citizen, it should actually be absolutely seamless. It'll all happen behind the scenes. No, by the time the land is sold, it will be territory land and it will comply with all the territory planning guidelines. Yep.
Maybe sustainability and city of the future. So at this moment, do you specific ideas or goals about solid footprints or block sizes or
Look, we've got a number of targets, and I'll let Guy talk to this in more detail. We've got a number of targets that we actually have for the site, but one of them is our intention is that the site will overall be a net positive energy producer and a net negative carbon emitter, but it goes to water usage on the site. So there are a whole range of targets that we're actually setting ourselves to actually achieve these benchmarks. Did you want to talk about them in a bit more detail? Or?
I can just add a comment. I guess there's a whole host of options that we're exploring. So we ran a crowdsourcing exercise internally with some of our scientists and for innovative ideas for Ginninderra, and we had 83 ideas in about a 1 week period. So there's all sorts of options, I guess, that we can explore. Some that are kind of quite blue sky, to others that are commercial ready right now. So I guess we're not locked into anything particular at this stage. It's still early days, and we're just exploring the opportunity space.
There's a comment here from online. I don't think this comment's going to change your opinion that much. But please pass on that we would appreciate this development coming online as soon as possible to create competition in the marketplace and stabilise land prices for the community. Obviously, housing affordability is a big concern for a lot of Canberra at the moment. Is that something that you're putting direct thought to?
To housing affordability, absolutely. We've actually already said that we will target a minimum of 10% of all dwellings as affordable housing. All I can say is our land release numbers have been communicated to the ACT government for a number of years now, and their numbers have always included our land release numbers. Yep.
Thank you very much,
And finally, we're going to invite Active AGL. So about the outages that we had recently in Gungahlin. So welcome. Do you want to do the? Sorry.
It's just going to be 30 seconds to get the projector on, so if you want to have a chance. Otherwise, I have to take it all home.
Thank you, Clinton.
That's not a good start. And you were also talking about the maintenance.
Yes.
Maintenance which?
Just the maintenance regimes. Okay, first of all, thank you for the invitation to come and can speak. Unfortunately, I would have liked it to have been about a more positive, I guess, aspect, but I did wanted to recognise
I guess, the issues that power outages can cause, and particularly the inconvenience that it can cause if it occurs at the wrong part of the day, particularly at night time over dinner time or on the morning commute into the office, and also the customers in the broader community with the number of outages, the frustration that can actually build not knowing what is actually going on. Just, I guess, in introduction to myself and ActuAGL. ActuAGL is effectively a business of two parts. So we have the retail business, which is really responsible for, I guess, selling you your electricity and your bill. And then we have the distribution part, which is responsible for the poles and wires that actually transport the energy from through the network and into your house. Now, my role is in part of the distribution side, and I really look after all the guys and girls that are out there actually building, maintaining and extending the network into the communities. I do have a colleague standing up the back, Leyland, who works very closely with my team. So Leyland is predominantly looking at setting the asset strategies and the performance of the network that I then go about putting into practice to make sure that we can get supply to customers. And tonight I just wanted to sort of step you through the recent outages, what's happened and what we've done about it, an oversight in regards to our maintenance regime, and then also wanted to introduce you to, I guess, our regulatory framework and how you as consumers and representatives of environments and councils and communities can actually get involved as part of that process. Any button, down button?
Probably the arrow keys. Left, right.
Right.
That one.
Okay. No, it's slipped on the screen, but not there. I mustn't be showing.
Oh, yeah. So it's up here, but not there, is that right?
Just disconnect the keyboard and connection because sometimes that's a problem.
Ah, there we go.
Is that what you
Yep. Yep. Sorry. So just firstly, in regards to any incident that we have on our network, our first priority is always the safety of the customers, safety of our staff, and also the safety of the network. And then once we go about doing that, it's then about restoring some power to the customers as quickly and as safely that we can do. No network is 100% safe or not, sorry, 100% safe, but 100% reliable, and that's why we have unplanned outages. Now, there are a number of causes or issues that can actually affect our network. They can be things like equipment failure, and you can see here in the photos, this is actually one of the photos of one of the faults that you would have experienced over the last 6 weeks, and you can see that the cable or the cable joint has actually failed. There are other events that can cause impacts onto the network, particularly being weather events. That usually affects our overhead network more so than our underground network. And then we have some equipment damage. And that is usually done by third parties, and that can eventuate in an unplanned outage, usually immediately, but can also cause some damage to the network that would then deteriorate over time and may result in an unplanned outage at some stage in the future, and that may be days, weeks, or potentially even years. If we look at Gungahlin and ActuAGL network, we have both an overhead network and an underground network. Now, in the Gungahlin area, the majority of our network is underground, although we do have some overhead network which is mainly on our feeders to get supply out into the suburbs. It then goes underground and feeds into your individual houses. The advantages of an underground network are traditionally they are more reliable, but the disadvantages are if there is a fault on the network, it is a lot harder to actually identify where that fault is, and then it does take longer to actually go about repairing that. Obviously if it's overhead, it's very easy to see. Once something is actually buried in the ground, it's actually hard to see what's going on underneath. Now, if we were to look at, I hope that can, you can see it. What I wanted to highlight here is effectively the extent of the broader Gungahlin network and how we get supply. Excuse me. Oh, did that work? How we get supply out into the suburbs, and this is a representation of our high voltage network. Now, you'll see right here in the centre, please excuse me for moving, this really is the centre hub where all the supply for the general area radiates out from, and each one of the coloured lines represents a high voltage feeder that actually takes power from our Gold Creek substation out into the various suburbs and community. It then goes through what we call a transformer and then into the underground network and usually into your houses.
Is that the transformer substation near Nichols?
It's a Gold Creek one, yes, near Nichols. Yeah. Sorry, I tried to put a satellite image over it, but it got very, very complicated and hard to read. Also, you'll see on the network the white lines. So you'll see the white down here and right up around. That is all 6 outages overlaid onto the one area, and I wanted to show you the extent of the customers that were actually affected as part of those 6 outages. So if you were to live in one of those suburbs adjacent or very close to those white lines, over the last 6 weeks when we've experienced those outages, chances are you would have experienced either one or potentially multiple outages as we transfer load on the network around and we switch the network to make sure we can get supply back on. The red dots that you can see are the actual 6 outages. So right up the top we have, sorry for moving, but right up the top we have a red dot which was a fault in one of our switch gears. We have Moncrief is right out up here.
So where is that one that you just pointed to by 171 on the top of the
I'd have to come back to you on that. I need to get my bearings in that regard. So it's, yeah, it'd be the top end of casing. We then have 2 which were the network protection faults of the safety settings at the zone substation. We have a cable fault here. We have the damaged earth mat, which is in here adjacent to the town centre, which is all in here.
That's near Infinity Towers. Damaged earth mat near Infinity Towers.
It's right next to the, I think it's Infinity Towers, but it's right next to the primary school. And then we have the last HV cable fault down here. So really what I just wanted to show in this context is the extent of where the outages were, but then how it affects the network. And depending upon how customers are actually fed through the coloured lines, customers may have experienced one or they may have experienced multiple outages over the last 6 weeks.
What's the damage to the
Can we just
So-
ask him to finish the question?
No, so I'm happy to take questions throughout. So in this case, underneath some of our substations, so our distribution substations that transform it from high voltage to low voltage, we have copper earth that is in the ground. Now, what that does, it's a safety mechanism so that if there is a potential rise in the electricity network, it's got a safe return back. Now, this one is actually a good example where it was actually dug up by an external contractor, so a third-party contractor digging in the ground that's damaged the earth. We became aware of it late in the afternoon, but decided to delay the outage until 10 o'clock at night to get customers through the peak period and limit the impact, but then made the call to actually turn it off at 10 o'clock at night and repair it, mainly due to the proximity being close to school, and we wanted to ensure that the network is as safe as possible before the next day, before the school kids started to come along. And
Is that the construction in the general area? Construction of the big tower?
I'm not 100% sure of the actual cause. All I know in that regard was that it was a third-party private contractor digging in the ground that's damaged the infrastructure.
So that was the normal outage. It was a planned outage.
It was a planned outage at 10 o'clock, which we put out on social media just prior to it and the rationale for it. Now, I said earlier that we can't guarantee 100% supply, and I can't guarantee that it's not going to happen again tomorrow night, but we have put in, I guess, some immediate actions to potentially limit and hopefully minimise any impact or the potential impact to customers, and that includes fixing all of those 6 issues and returning the network back to normal. We've also got a lot of capital upgrade works here at this centre hub, which we've put on hold until after the winter peak. Now that capital upgrade works is really about improving our network, but also we need to do that work, we need to actually take feeders out. So what we mean is basically turn a feeder off and put all of those customers on another feeder. So if we have a fault on that feeder, what it would mean is it would actually impact twice as many customers. So we've made the call to actually suspend that work until after the peak period, so that we've got plenty of redundancy in the network, that if something was to happen, we can quickly switch around it and get people back on as quickly as possible. And if something was to happen, it would also mean that as minimal as people as possible would actually be affected. And then, as we do with all our cable faults or damaged equipment, we pull them out, we analyse them. Sometimes we actually send them away to the University of Wollongong for them to do some detailed analysis on what's gone wrong, and that is then fed back into our maintenance program around how we then go and maintain our assets. If I get this right, hopefully. Okay. Just to, I guess, highlight some of the frustrations that my guys go through on a daily basis in restoring supply. So this is a picture of a fault that occurred in the Gungahlin Town Centre about 6 to 8 months ago, and it's on the corner of Anthony Rolfe and I think Gozzards. Is that where there's a bar and grill? Sirens, yep. So it occurred outside of Sirens. And the process we go through in obviously restoring supplies, firstly we go through a process of isolating the damaged piece of equipment or the damaged piece of cable, which minimises the customers affected, and then we can switch around that and bring as many customers back on as possible. Now, as part of that process, customers may experience power go on and off for short periods of time as we do that, as we switch the network. It's a bit like turning light switches on and off, so to speak. And in most cases, the response is relatively quick from the guys being able to switch around the network and isolate the fault. Once the fault is actually isolated to a damaged piece of cable, we then have some specialist equipment come in to actually test the cable that traces it out and clearly identifies exactly where the fault is and can give us an indication of what type of fault it is. Then we have to go through obviously the restoration works, and as you can see, it can be quite a mess and quite tricky to get to, given that electricity is usually the first service put in and therefore is usually at the bottom. Now, I think it was Zed said earlier that Gungahlin is our newest town centre. It is, but some of our cables that actually come into Gungahlin is 25 years old. And we've got although that's only about 50% through their lifespan, we need to maintain those cables, and as load grows with new buildings and infrastructure, we need to put in additional feeders and strengthen the network to ensure and maintain that supply. Just to put this picture into context for you, the orange here and the black cable is our network, which is at the bottom. We have the yellow, which are gas mains, so both the 110 and the 75 mil gas mains. We then have the large white conduits, which are optical fibre, and then we have the smaller conduits, which are sometimes optic fibre but are usually more your traditional telecoms component. And a lot of that really delays some of the infrastructure repairs. In addition to that, and I know it's a hard picture to see, but we need to manage, this being on a corner, there's actually pedestrian access, there's footpath we had to rip up, sometimes there's paving, sometimes there's gardens. Being right out front of the Sirens Bar and Grill, we had to manage the commercial element of their business and how do they maintain business and process and work with them around getting their patronage in and out in a safe way. I also wanted to show you this picture because of the electricity network being at the bottom, and in some cases has been in the ground for 25 years, and as technology develops and new networks are developed like optic fibre, as they go through and put it in over the top, there is the potential that as part of that process it does actually disturb the underlying electricity network, and like I said earlier, sometimes it can eventuate in a fault relatively quickly. Sometimes it could take a matter of weeks, months and or years before a fault actually shows up.
Sorry, if I can quickly jump in, I've got a question online that was related to cables.
Yep.
So I'll ask it now. You're saying if cable is to blame for some of these outages, however, I think the question stands, has Gungahlin had inferior cable laid? Is it generally the same product that would be used throughout Canberra, or being the newer suburb, have they used?
So the product changes over time. So we have a mix of cables in our network. Ultimately, we have some really old paper, lead, armoured cables. They're quite heavy, they're steel. They are our oldest cable in the network, and they have a lifespan of around 70 or 80 years, and some of those are sort of 50 to 70% of the way through their lifespan. A lot of these cables are XLPE, and there are two types of XLPE. There are ones that were put into the ground about 25 years ago, which have a lifespan of around the 40 to 50 years at the moment. And then we've got a newer XLPE cable that the expected lifespan on that is pushing out sort of the 50 years to 60 years plus. Now, that's our predicted, or that's the theoretical, as what we're finding with a lot of our assets, that as we actually, if we maintain them properly and if they're installed properly, as we get through to that lifespan, we're actually seeing those actually extend significantly. One of the main issues we can encounter is, if this cable was installed 25 years ago, we don't necessarily know what the conditions were that was actually installed in 25 years ago. And it could be as simple as a slight scrape on the cable that slowly ingresses moisture over a period of months or years that then eventuates in a fault. And that's why we send a component of our cable failures away to be analysed to determine is it actually an issue with quality, is it workmanship, or is it something else that's actually occurred.
Is there any difference in voltage being put through this old cable?
No, so these ones here, and majority of the network in the ACT is 11,000 volts from a high voltage perspective, and then 240 volts from the low voltage.
New cable, same voltage?
Sorry?
Newer cable, same
New cables, same voltage. It makes it easier that way. Okay. Sorry?
You're moving on from the faults to the mains?
Yeah, no, I can go back to...
Oh, no, just before we move on to the next section, if there are any other questions about the faults, this is probably a good time for us.
Yep.
I'm just trying to understand, what are you telling us? Is it a case of this is just a random sequence of events that led to numerous faults over the past few weeks? Is it a coincidence?
We've been able to find no reason or rationale to actually correlate any of the six. So one was a switchgear failure, two were cable failures that were on cables that were of different ages and in different locations. Two related to protection settings. One of those is still suspect around whether it was actually the protection setting or the cause is unknown, and then we have the third party one.
So it's not a case of you haven't kept up with the maintenance, that's all fully up to date and that's no reason for these events happening?
No, so it's correct, and that's why I guess Leyland's here in regards to the maintenance. Every time we have an issue though, we take these faults, we go away, we analyse it, we then compare it against, well, can we improve our maintenance program, or what we're doing is actually the best practice at the moment.
So, just because we're going to talk about the clear and stuff, I've got some questions. So basically, 2,300 customers lost power on May 8th, 15th, 17th and 24th. Gungahlin, Jacka, Bonner, Amaro Court, and then also 3,000 residents in Harrison, Gungahlin, Mitchell, Monterey. But, so some of your outages, you probably, you know that you're going to do like a planned one, and some of them, it's unplanned outages. So with your unplanned outages, have you ever updated on your Facebook? Because I'd seen on the social media people need to wait to see what actually happening. So it shouldn't take you guys like 5 minutes to just put on Facebook saying, okay, we know that something's happening in Gungahlin in a particular region or anything. So I couldn't see any kind of proactive thing using your social media.
In the majority of these cases, no, and as a general rule, no. Is it something that we need to look at? 100%. And we're looking, at the moment, we're looking at new technologies and ways of how we can actually better integrate with things like social media and other platforms. And ultimately, it's about giving customers greater knowledge so that they can make decisions around, how long the power will be, what's actually going on, how is it going to affect me.
There is a Twitter that goes out from an on-day feed, but the problem is there is a delay between the lights going out, so you immediately know the power of each versus that tweet coming out. So people already start reacting on social media saying the power of each, so like we're involved in that.
Yeah, I understand that. But sometimes like for 30 minutes you still don't know what's happening because you're waiting on the phone line on someone to get connected. So
yeah, I think that we also as a community have to be realistic too, that we know as soon as the power outage goes out, these guys know after that fact. Then they have to go and find the fault, work out the fault is and work out how it's going to fix it. So I think as a community we've got to be reasonable in that they can't tell us it's going to take 2 hours.
I think we're talking about two things. What I was asking was like we just need to know that something is wrong so people know.
But in defence of that, it's the workmen that get called out to fix the fault. It's not the people that would normally do the social media stuff. That get woken at 3 in the morning.
No. We do need to bear in mind though that when we have outages like you mentioned, yes, at the height there is potentially 2,000 or 3,000 customers affected because that's what traditionally we have roughly grouped together on a feeder. If we look back at how those customers are affected through the outages, they will be periodically turned on as we restore supply. And when I was looking at the Gungahlin one, which was the one that occurred on the 2nd of June, I think by memory there was about 60% of customers were back on within 40 minutes. So the lights have gone off, we've realised it, we've dispatched our resources who have actually travelled. Now they may have actually been local on that day, but we do have resources right across Canberra. If they did have to travel, they would have had to travel. I think the one on the 1st or the 2nd of June was in the afternoon. So again, if they're going against peak hour traffic, it will slow them down. They've then got there and started to switch the network to identify and get customers back on. And the majority of customers were back on within the hour. So it's a good response from those guys. It still doesn't limit the frustrations that customers feel, particularly if it is right at that critical time when you're trying to cook dinner or bath kids and so forth. And that's where we do need to be a little bit more proactive in regards to the social media so that the customers feel informed and they can make the decisions around how it affects them. Now, whether that's where they go out and get dinner or what area is affected and where I could go and get dinner, or whether I just put it off and delay things for half an hour.
The frustration really comes down to the frequency, and it did start to become, you can see the frustration but also the humour behind it, the sense of, hey, guess what, it's Canberra Monday,
I didn't see the humour after talking to Chris Coleman one Friday and saying I don't expect it to happen again, and I was back on the radio the next week. So I can certainly understand it.
I think that everyone can forgive, one outage. Yep, you can't build a perfect network, but when it's happening repeatedly in the same areas and that awkward time of night, and people were having to throw out the dinner, try and go and find a takeaway that was actually have power to feed them. On the communication side, what I found frustrating was the lack of communication coming out from our QAGL on this. I run my Gungahlin, I was reaching out trying to get answers and offering our channel to do just this, like to sit with you in front of our QAGL house and have this conversation. If we had had this 3 or 4 weeks ago, it could have gone a long way to explaining or appeasing, your client base.
Yep.
I think that's something that needs to be looked at is not only that communication as and when it's happening, like the Ngunnawal outage, I think that could have been handled better as well, because that notification came out on Twitter
moments beforehand, and the first I knew about it was when power was out. But it's that follow-up, coming back to people and understanding their frustration. The information that was coming out it was kind of glossing over it, not kind of being very direct. And I think you owe that to your customers to be a bit more direct and transparent.
Yep. No. So I certainly acknowledge that, and that's one of the things we are looking at currently around how we can more proactively engage with the customers through their method of choice, whether it be Twitter, Facebook or text messages, to give them the information to make those choices.
Even some of the local MLAs have questioned the approach of not offering some sort of compensation, similar to a telecommunications company offering compensation in regards to services that weren't available. And there's also some people that had appliances apparently damaged during the random on and off switching of the network, which I can imagine would send some strong voltage down the lines. And those people apparently were sort of ignored or in regards to replacements of some of their lessons. And even though I understand you can't guarantee a network, but if it was some damage to people's appliances, I would imagine some of those people probably, if they could verify that with you.
Yeah, so in regards to compensation, on our website there is a link through to, I guess, the compensation process and what avenues customers can actually follow and or what would constitute a potential claim. That process is there. People can go through, view it. Then if they submit a claim, each claim is actually reviewed on a case-by-case basis. Sorry? There is a process, and it's on our website. Each claim is reviewed on a case-by-case basis, and the feedback's directly back to the customer.
I guess the worry is that network capacity. Are we different
Well,
from other areas of Canberra, or is this just a random fluctuation?
Well, I think your local MLA put it quite well in one of his releases around, on average, the residents of Gungahlin are performing really well, but averages don't account for much over the last 6 weeks.
And network is not collapsed?
No.
Averages, I think he said, were for the whole district of Canberra.
Yep.
But if you took Gungahlin in isolation, it wasn't probably up to the standard. The actual AGL has a higher standard than the national average. Is this right?
Yeah. But if you just look at the average of how customers are affected on a 12 months, and you look back, you take the last 6 weeks out in regards to Gungahlin, and you look back, it performs really well. You include the last 6 weeks, so it doesn't. So the averages don't really count for it.
I'm assuming as well, though, there would be averages in other suburbs in Canberra that are unexplained, like with roadworks or things like that everyone doesn't know about, because we've got my Gungahlin where everyone gets immediately to the power and that the other suburbs just don't have that outlet.
It's true, some suburbs aren't as proactive, or communities aren't as proactive. But what we are seeing is a significant trend towards the use of social media and how things are shared. I'm not sure whether any of you follow Actu-AGL on the various feeds and so forth, but last week there was a bit of a social media frenzy around rescuing Ash the kitten from the top of a pole, which is something, it's quite ironic because it's something that occurs quite frequently, and it's one of those decisions where, do you want to go up? Because most cases when we go up, the cat will actually jump down, and you don't really want a cat to jump from 10 or 12 metres down because they may injure themselves. So we try and wait as long as possible to say, well, let it come down on its own accord once it's ready. If not, then we'll actually go up and bring it down. In this case, Ash the cat decided to jump. Yep.
At what point, despite a perfect maintenance program and good installation practices, at what point do you say the number of unplanned outages in a period of time is just not random? There is something fundamental that we haven't seen that we need to find. Is there a point where randomness becomes impossible?
Yep. So we're not looking at this and dismissing it as it is, random. We can't see at the moment any correlation between it. We know that there's a lot of growth going on in the area. There's a lot of development work. There is load growth. We are actually doing our own, network extension and augmentation to strengthen and support the network. What we're doing though is we're also looking at, potentially what has caused this, how is it going to affect the network, what maintenance programs do we, need to change or amend to limit not only the effect here but right across our network. And we're also looking at, which we do continually, what is, the load growth in the area, and, are there things that we can actually bring forward in our capital works program that would actually strengthen the network.
Is there any way to provide more redundancy to the network by having extra feeders coming into that network?
Yes, there is. So there's a couple of feeders that is planned to bring additional load into the Gungahlin Town Centre, which again will allow the load to be shed, more evenly across all the other feeders. It's something that we're investigating now, but there's no concrete plans to actually put it in. It's something that potentially could go in the next sort of 6 to 12 months.
So if people are interested, there's an annual report that we publish every year. It's available on the website. It's a future logo.
The crystal ball going forward is that this situation could possibly be better or could possibly get worse. We just don't really know. So
Underground cables are determine their condition is much more difficult than the air because you can't see it. So we do have a program condition monitoring to try to predict failures.
If this situation got worse, though, could there be something scoped in there as a bit of a plan B to say, well, maybe we need to proactively replace some of the network in order to limit the possibility of this happening?
Maybe still
Yeah, so in the south, we have a cable or a feeder that runs out of our Waniassa zone, so in between Tuggeranong and Woden, that feeds directly down into the Tuggeranong Town Centre. That has been a problematic feeder for us over the last predominantly 3 years. It's a feeder that, correct me if I'm wrong, is about 30, 40 years old. It's one of the first feeders in the area, in the Tuggeranong area, and as Tuggeranong has grown broader, it's actually been cut and changed and moved. Over the 8 kilometre length, it ended up with 53 joints in the network, and every time there's a joint, it's a cut and splice. So if there's a fault at one joint, you cut and splice and you create two more, and it basically lowers the capacity of the network and creates a series of weak points. We took the opportunity to take that out of service, and we needed to basically dig it up in set lengths, cut the cables, test it. That process outlined that the cable was basically not fit to go back into service, and we had enough time to actually go through a replacement of that full 8 kilometres of cable prior to the winter peak. We're now 3-4 weeks into that process of replacing that cable, and the intent is that will now be finished by the end of the financial year and before the Tuggeranong Town Centre peak really kicks in over the winter period.
So something like that could be considered.
Yeah.
It would be part of our response to
and as part of our ongoing sort of maintenance and inspection and testing programs, we're always looking for the new technology that comes to market and does that improve the analysis of our cable and tell us better, I guess, parameters around the condition, and then how does that flow through into our maintenance.
It sounds like that's what the government wanted, the proactive response actually in regards to what we can do about it. I can understand that.
Sorry, we actually running out of time, so I'll let you finish.
Well, really, the last couple are quite quick. I just wanted to highlight that we do have a maintenance program. It involves a whole range of things through inspecting our assets and maintaining our assets. I kind of like to liken it towards a car. If you walk around your car and you notice that your tyres are bald, you go and get them replaced. We'll actually go and inspect our assets. If we notice something wrong, we'll do some corrective maintenance. A lot of our assets have periodic servicing or maintenance, so a bit like your car, once it reaches the 15 or 30 or 50,000 K service, our assets will need to be taken out and go through a maintenance regime, and likewise through our testing, so we can put in, as part of our maintenance programs, we may actually test the cables like we did with Sternberg, a bit like your alarm or dash indicator or something. If something comes up in your car, you'll take it in and get it fixed. It's just an early warning sign that something may be going wrong, and then we can put in a maintenance program. The last slide really is, there's probably two I think actually. So, and this is where you can really get involved. So ultimately our maintenance program we put up to the Australian Energy Regulator, and it's over a 5-year period, and that really determines the types of maintenance and how much maintenance we're going to do on the network, which obviously flows back through to customers in regards to the distribution component of their bill, and that gives us basically how much money we can spend. The timing is I guess right now to get the communities involved in our submission. So we have a 5-year submission that a draft needs to go to the Australian Energy Regulator in January this year. From July we will be starting community consultation, and there'll be a whole range of forums and avenues where individual customers or community groups or forums can actually provide impact or input into what our regulatory proposal will be in regards to the types of maintenance and how we maintain the network. And the last slide, I went the wrong way, is really about how you can actually get involved in that. So there is an email address that you can send in and subscribe, and then you'll get the updates around how to get involved. There is a link on our website through to consumer engagement. You can watch our social media. We'll be starting to proactively post out that how people can actually provide feedback on our proposal. And also we do have some forms up the back with Joe if someone wants to sign up tonight to make sure that they're informed of what's going on and provide some impact or input into that process.
And electricity prices are going up next month by about 20%.
So electricity prices are going up next month by about 20%. I'm proud to say, being part of the network or distribution business, it's not a result of us. It is actually a result of the wholesale energy prices that are being passed through to the retailers that then gets passed through to customers, unfortunately. But our guys will still be out there maintaining the network for you.
So sorry, probably not a question for you. In terms of the ACT purchasing its power more and more fixed price renewable energy contracts, does that mean those prices should start coming down or stabilise in the future?
That's probably an area not of my expertise. Certainly can take it on notice and get someone from our regulatory team or even our retail team to provide that back through the forum's website.
Government objected to it, and actually APL or ICON objected to the ruling of the ICON.
Yep.
Why aren't you guys objecting to the price increases? It doesn't seem
The wholesale price.
why aren't you objecting? Why don't you just accept what the ICON?
So I'm not sure that we're not objecting. Objecting to it. I need to come back to you on that, and I need to refer it through to our regulatory team in regards to how they are responding to that price increase.
How do we get on
Ultimately, I see you would go through, providing feedback to forums like this in regards to our response or our regulatory determination, like that retailers and distributors, transmission authorities all go through the same process and should have the same avenues available to customers to provide that input. And then you have your local MLAs that will support you in driving those avenues.
I put in objections to these fees. I
Yep. Look, and even coming from the distribution part of the business, in the past I'd probably acknowledge that we haven't been as proactive in engagement with customers or listening to customers as we should be, and that's something that we are changing now through opportunities like this to provide feedback on our response. We have regular meetings with the Consumer Reference Council in regards to what our plans are, what's happening within the network and so forth.
ACT government is a shareholder, is that correct?
So ACT government is a shareholder through Icon Water Investments.
Is it a large percentage?
It's a 50-50 split between the partnerships.
Government's a major shareholder of you.
Yes.
One is a comment actually, and to say that obviously these outages are extremely frustrating for the residents. However, this person would like to express their appreciation for the workers who do go out at odd hours in the night in the cold to rectify those. So I'd like to pass that on.
Great.
Actually, no, Miguel, it's been answered.
Great.
My question was, on a scale of 1 to 10, how nervous were you tonight?
Well, not knowing your sense of humour, maybe next time. I was going to try and plan someone to turn the lights out at the start as a joke, but thought we'll start serious and then get a little bit more flippant. So, look, thank you for the time. Happy to come back at any stage.
Thanks, Lincoln, and Activate your team. Thanks for very much for coming. Just want to thank all of our 4 speakers tonight. Thank you very much for coming down, and thank you for all our people, wonderful people who come in the the cold weather. Thank you very much, and for the people who are watching on the Facebook, thank you for joining us. And we do have some snacks left over there, so feel free to enjoy. Thank you, everyone.